Welcome to Feminine Power Time. Turn off the chatter and tune in to what matters. This is Christine Arylo, your host, and today I welcome you to episode number 93. It is the second in our third-part series named Overwhelmed and Over It. And today's episode is all about why it's not your fault. If you feel overwhelmed and you are over it, it is not your fault. And today I'm going to share why. I work with so many women and men all around the world, and I myself have felt like, how do I even get out of this overwhelm? I've tried the 7 steps to self-care. I've tried finding work-life balance. I've tried all of the different things, drinking green drinks, going to weekly yoga classes, new day timers, new productivity. It's like all of these stress management, self-care tips that are out there, but yet nothing seems to shift. And for years, I would ask myself the question, why is that? After all of this time of talking about work-life balance, after all of the many gazillions of books that have been written about stress management, about all the gazillions of books that have been written about self-care and the countless articles that are still published by well-meaning people, how is it that it could be that we are still feeling overwhelmed and burned out and stretched beyond our capacity, stretched beyond our means, financial means, emotional means, time means? And when I started asking myself this question several years ago, I started finding answers. That has led me to, today, our Feminine Power Time session, but also to dedicate the next 3 books that I'm writing, the 4th, which is called so for those of you that are new here, welcome. You wouldn't know this, but I've already written 3 books specifically focused on self-love. And the next 3 books are focused on women's empowerment and leadership, but from a very different place. Meaning that there's so much talk out there right now, which is amazing, about going out in the world and being powerful and being empowered and having a voice and taking a stand. But loves, if we do not first address the reality that as powerful and brilliant as we are, I have yet to meet a woman on the planet who doesn't feel stretched, who doesn't feel overwhelmed, who isn't sacrificing some part of her health, her happiness, her well-being for her work, for her family, for something. And there's something going on that no self-care strategy is going to change. And if we don't stand up and take a stand for this, our children are going to inherit it, and their children. And we're going to keep living in this crazy-paced world that doesn't work for any of us. And so today in our second series, I'm going to share with you 6 of the truths that I've found, 6 truths that can liberate us out of this overwhelmed, self-sacrifice, burnout jail. We have to, whenever we're working in this realm of really getting to the root of what's going on, which is what we do here at Feminine Power Time, versus just focused on the solution or the symptom, we got to dive in and illuminate what's really going on. So I'm going to share some wisdom and kind of shine the big light today on ways in which you may know some of these, you may not know some of these, of reasons, the root reasons why we're stuck in this overwhelm, burnout, self-sacrifice pattern. And then next week, as we go into the 3rd of this series in this session, we'll talk about what I call the path of liberation. So once you can see the truth, right? They always say the truth will set you free. Well, that's true. So we're going to get to the truth, but then it's like, okay, now that you have the truth, what do we do with that? And what is the path of liberation? Because there is a path, and we'll talk more about that next week. So make sure you come back for both of those. And if you missed the first session, go back and listen to that too, and you can still tune into this. And before we get started, we've already started, but I want to give you a couple of announcements. One is part of the reason that I decided to do this Overwhelmed and Over It series is those of you that have been around for a while, for the last 1.5 years, I've been working on the book proposal for Overwhelmed and Over It, Why It's Not Your Fault and How to Find the Power to Change It. And that book, I just signed the contract a couple weeks ago, is going to be coming out in September of 2020. And I don't want to have to wait for all of you that are really ready for transformation to have that transformation. So I'm going to be diving into writing the book this summer, starting in June and beyond. And an exciting new announcement is I've been sitting with for those of you that are really ready for the transformation, how can I invite you into this process? Well, I'm going to be opening up 11 to 13 spots for women who really do desire to liberate themselves out of the overwhelm and the self-sacrifice and the burnout. And you're ready and willing to liberate yourself, to really empower yourself out of it. And as I'm writing the book, every month I'll be working on one specific section of liberation. We'll talk more about those pieces of liberation next week. You'll be going through the work with me. And so you'll be getting the work right away. It'll be going into your life, and you'll be making that transformation, and you'll be part of the actual creating of the book, so that your energy and your process will be impacting the thousands, hopefully, and tens of thousands and millions, hopefully, that end up getting this book in 2020. And so that you can find out more about that at overwhelmedandoverit.com. It was an inspiration that came through my heart straight away. And I'm like, this will be amazing to be able to, over the course of the next 5 to 6 months, go through this journey and also be able to do that with women who are ready for the transformation. So make sure to check that out. And for those of you that aren't quite ready for personal transformation, well, we're going to be here at Feminine Power Time, and you're going to take what you need and take what you can bring with you. And remember that we do have our mid-year power pause happening. So that's a lighter kind of dive in of really taking a look at where to focus your life force the second part of the year. Go to flowpowerpause.com, and that's going to happen at the end of June around summer solstice. And then we have the Feminine Wisdom Weekend Retreat on the East Coast that we do every year for those of you that are in any kind of transition or want a deeper dive to really sink into your inner wisdom, to stay strong to some of the choices that you're making in your life. Come to Kripalu and just check out femininewisdomweekend.com, and you'll find out more about that, which happens in July. And for those of you that are interested in teaching self-love to others, we have our first 5-day intensive immersion in person at Kripalu happening this summer. And this is for anyone who wants to teach self-love to others, guide others, and also for yourself. And you can find more about that at the pathofselflove.org. So that's what's going on. And without further ado, let's just go ahead and close our eyes for a moment and take a breath. As we drop into these 6 truths of why it is that we have been stuck in this overwhelm pattern. So truth number 1, as I go through each one of these, I lit a candle for you all, by the way. It's in a little heart dish that was made by a bunch of 7 and 8-year-olds. And I chose to light this because I feel like that it's really our hearts. When I think about the fact that 1 in 3 women will die of heart disease, that number used to be 1 in 4. It's going the wrong way. And there are real reasons this pressure and this stress is here, and that we haven't been able to figure out how to do it differently. And the first one is that the systems that we work in and that we live in were built for burnout. They weren't built to support you to thrive. So just think about that. The systems that you work in and you live in were built for burnout. They were not built to support you to thrive. Just think about it this way. Women did not create these systems. We acclimated to survive within them. So think about the current business systems, the market system, the educational system, the healthcare system, the government system. They were all designed at a time around the 1700s to fuel an industrial revolution and then to ignite an age of information and technology whose main goal was not to support and sustain women. It was not to support and sustain women. It was not to support and sustain families. It was not even built to support and sustain humanity or the earth. I mean, there were no focus groups about whether or not work schedules and environments and success measures were really good for humanity, for personal fulfillment, and for wellness or cultivating healthy, loved children. This didn't happen, although it needed to happen, and it needs to happen now. What happened was these systems were built and designed to maximize productivity and profit. They were created to mint workers, not to be crass, but really they were created to mint workers to manufacture more stuff and to create and train leaders to grow bigger, to grow faster, to grow continuously so they could succeed in a world of competition and domination. That is how it's been, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, this millennium. And while that might have served, so this is not a blame game, this is not a finger-pointing game, there's a great spiritual wisdom that says the systems that exist were created in the consciousness in which they were created in. So this consciousness during the Industrial Revolution and during the Age of Information totally may have served humanity to create the infrastructures that we needed. Created roads, it created ways for people to get food that they couldn't get food before. You can get food now from Chicago to California, or California to Chicago, probably more like it, which you couldn't do before. The railroads, the transportation systems, the way that we can communicate and we can stay connected through the internet. None of that would have been possible if that infrastructure hadn't happened. But that's not what we need today. So if systems, just like people, have a consciousness that are based on the consciousness from which they were created, just think about that for a minute. It means that even if we try to make a change in our own lives or within the systems that we lead and influence in, the systems and their grow faster values, which is at the root of all the systems that exist. So even for good-meaning people who want to make change in their life, or we want to change the systems, we can't. Because it just is so rooted in that grow faster, be more, dominate over culture that brings us all back into the swirl where at the very core, it's all connected and tied to money and the financial system and how we value things in this world. And so this is why if you're a person who desires to make change in your life or you desire to make change in the systems, we just end up getting defeated and depleted, and then we give up because we're tired. And as Gloria Steinem told me once in a lunch conversation, which I'll talk a little bit about more next week, she said to me when I said, okay, great, now what do we do? So we're just screwed. She said, Christine, no, but the systems, until the systems change, this pressure won't change for women. And in the 1970s and the 1990s, we had to suck it up, right? We couldn't make change. We weren't in positions of power or authority or influence to make change. So we put the shoulder pads on to fit in. We cut our hair to look like men. We wore the black suits. But today, you are in a position to make change happen. Every single one of us, no matter what position we have or title we have, because from a feminine power perspective, your power comes from your presence. And so whether that's the choices that you make and how you raise your children, how you design your life, how you form your business, how you run your teams, regardless of if the bigger system changes, you have the power to change within you. But first, I need you to get and really illuminate and just take a look around and start to notice the systems that you work in and live in. From the government to healthcare to education. I mean, think about our poor little baby children that have less of a lunch break than they ever have less recess, have less art, have less spaciousness. We're just pummeling information into them and shifting them from subject to subject every 45 minutes and pressuring them earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier to perform. And then we feed them right into the same system to perform, to produce. No wonder 12-year-olds are having stress symptoms that only 55-year-olds used to have. It's getting worse, not better. Now, I don't want any of us to feel like we have to pick up our swords and go straight at the systems to change them, but we have to illuminate and look at the systems for what they are and not be lemmings. We're not going to just be little lemmings that are just going to march around and just accept how things are. Because here's the second truth. The ways that you work and live, the ways that all of us work and live, are not inherently how things have to be. Humans made the systems, which means we have the power to change the systems. But only if you can see the systems, and then you have the courage and the support that you need to cultivate the courage, and the practices you need to cultivate the courage to do things differently. So one of my favorite words is overculture. And some of you, I'm just going to move my foot around here as I'm settling in with you all. As I'm sharing this with you all, I'm looking at my book proposal, because in the book proposal, as well as will be in the book, these 6 truths kind of start the foundation. And I spent a lot of time and years really asking this question, and when I was able to get into these 6 truths, it just made me feel a lot better. Like, okay, now I know what to do, and now I can see things differently. And this word overculture here in our second truth, it's one of my favorite words. It's a word that is coined by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote the book Woman Who Runs with Wolves and Untie the Strong Woman. And if you don't know those two books, they're seminal books for any woman who wishes to embrace and embody feminine power and wisdom. And the overculture is a very interesting thing. It is, well, I'll give you the definition here. So when we are unconscious of the overculture, of the systems that we work and live in, we are like goldfish in a fishbowl. So just think of this as a metaphor. We're like goldfish in a fishbowl, oblivious that we're swimming in contaminated waters, and we're unaware that we have the power to choose differently. So we just accept these ways of working and living as like normal. Like this is just normal. Like, of course, we have no choice but to work this way, but to live this way, but to educate our kids this way, but to say this is okay for healthcare, to say this is okay for government. Like we just accept them as normal. Even if we intuitively know that it's unhealthy and unnecessary. So we're kind of like salmon who was once wild. I'm like looking out right now at the Puget Sound, and there's an eagle out there and these geese and these crows, and they're wild. But we're like these domesticated fish and domesticated birds that have been put into a pen of productivity. And so we acclimate ourselves to these unsustainable realities. And if we were like fish in a fishbowl, which is kind of what we've become, these domesticated fish, we depend on the fish flakes for our livelihood. And we just keep sacrificing our personal wellness and our personal happiness until one day we end up belly up in the fishbowl from working too hard, giving too much, and sacrificing ourselves. And then what happens to that fish? Like what happens when the goldfish goes belly up? Does it get accolades? Like, thank you so much for working so hard? Does it get like an extra couple letters on its tombstone? Does it like get glorified, for hundreds of years to come? No. It gets flushed down the toilet and it gets replaced by another fish. It gets replaced by another fish. So just think about that for a second. Think about in your own life, what is creating the overwhelm? What is creating the self-sacrifice? What are you giving your life force to? And is it worth going belly up for? Is it worth being flushed down the toilet for it someday? And you may say to me, yes, it is. And honey, the answer is no, it's not. So part of the reason we get so overwhelmed is because we're stuck in these systems and we don't even know that we're in the systems, and we're entranced by this overculture, which is this dominant, often, that is my alarm going off, reminding me to surrender. So let's all surrender and also be strategic about how do we, and here's the definition of overculture. The dominant and often power-mad culture we try to navigate without being crushed or over-assimilated into. The dominant or often power-mad culture we try to navigate without being crushed or over-assimilated into. So it isn't your fault that you might be stuck in a fishbowl. And even, like me, who has a mission in the world and has left many of the systems as an employee or as a person, even how I navigate the healthcare system or how I navigate the government system, how I interact with these systems is very different than I did before I was aware of all of this. But I can still get trapped in my own fishbowl of self-sacrifice, of giving everything to my mission, giving everything away to what I care about. And then I'm still belly up, and I will be belly up a lot faster, and then not actually be able to serve you or anybody if I'm belly up. And so as women in the workplace, the truth is we're just trying to keep up, and we're often too overwhelmed to question why we're working this way. I mean, that's part of what's going on here. It's like we're so overwhelmed and stretched so thin, we don't actually have a moment to say, like, am I in a fishbowl? I don't know if I'm in a fishbowl. What overculture am I being driven by? And we're just trying to keep our head above the water and not asking ourselves, why are we working this way? And then we just, even if we do ask why we're working this way, we're not really supported often to be responded to with like, yeah, let's go deeper into that. So some of the questions that came up for me, and I'll just give you these to chew on. They're just good examples of the overculture, of questions that came up for me as I started to see what was going on. Like one was like looking at the mode of monetary and time exchange. So just think about this for a second. Like, why do we work 40 hours a week? Well, what is our paychecks? For any that you get paychecks, why do you work 40 hours a week? And you have e-stubs. And I had some of my friends I'm like, can you all look at your pay? I asked them, like, how many of you have, it says 40 hours? And they're like, I don't even know. I've never even looked at my paycheck. Well, none of my friends and none of my clients and no one I work with works 40 hours. But we have this 40-hour imaginable thing in us, and that we work for 40 hours and we get paid for 40 hours. Even if you're an entrepreneur and you've ever worked in any system, it gets stuck and lodged in your brain that this is just how things are. But we all work more than 40 hours. So why are we all pretending that there's this 40-hour magic thing? And maybe at some point it used to be like that was beneficial, so we didn't have sweat factories and people working 100 hours or 120 hours. But when I talk to my clients who are doctors and they talk to me about how as a resident, there's a law that says they can't work more than 100 hours a week. There's a law, 100 hours a week. Or I talk to my friends who are lawyers or teachers, and how many hours, or entrepreneurs, or how much I worked when I was a consultant. 40 was like, that would have been amazing. So why are we working on this 40-hour weekend that isn't even real? And what about the models for the work week? So there's this 5-day-a-week mentality that we have to work 5 days a week, starts on Monday, ends on Friday, and then we all work on the weekends just to get that head start. And then if you're working for somebody else, maybe you get 2 weeks vacation, 4 weeks if you're lucky, and if you're in Europe, it's a lot better off. But then how many people feel guilty for it? Have you ever felt guilty for it? And does this rhythm really support you? Why do you have to work 5 days a week? Why is it only 2 weeks vacation or 4 weeks vacation? Where does this come from? And does this really serve us now? And again, it might have served us in the past, but I don't really think it's serving us anymore. And if we were to flow how we worked and we were to flow what that looked like, I bet we could actually get our work. Some weeks we would work more than 40 hours. Some weeks we would work 20 hours. Some weeks we would take Tuesdays off. Some days it would just be a whole different structures. And so my question to you, and we'll get to the solutions and we'll talk more about that, but to start just getting how things are isn't how they have to be. And I'm inviting you to open up your eyes and see and illuminate and look around you, because when a woman begins to see the overculture that you're swimming in, something ignites in you. There's like this fierce feminine power that awakens and says, actually, no, this isn't right. This isn't working for me. It's not working for those I lead. It's not working for those I love. It's not working for the earth and sustainability. This is crazy. That's the moment you begin to become empowered to speak up and do things differently. Now, these first two were really focused on the external symptoms and the external systems. Now I'm going to take that flashlight, that illumination flashlight, and I'm going to point it at ourselves, not as a finger, but as an illuminator, because here's the third truth that can set us free. Our personal internal operating systems. Your internal operating system is what runs your thoughts, your feelings, and your habits, and therefore your actions, are programmed to self-sacrifice, to work hard, to give it all away, and to keep up a strong facade. So even if someone told you that you could stop working so hard tomorrow, you would just find another way to exhaust yourself. You'd just find another way to fill up your schedule, and we'd just find another way to stay busy. Like, just nod your head if this sounds like you at all. I mean, I have a piece of heart art on my desk that says spaciousness on it that I drew 2 years ago. And do you think that there are times when spaciousness is there, like last Saturday when I had not had my weekly Sabbath, which is a practice I put into place to liberate myself out of self-sacrifice and overwhelm and burnout. On the 7th day, I rest, and I hadn't had a real one for 2 weeks because I had gone through this very intense time period. And so I knew I needed my Sabbath more than ever. Yet still, there was that voice. Really, Christine, you're just going to lay on your daybed and look out the window and stare at the Puget Sound and maybe read a book that has nothing to do with saving the world or making the better world a better place. Really? That's all you're going to do today? Don't you have something more to do? How could you just take the space? How could you just take the space? How could you just take the space? I'm so much more aware of my internal operating system. This is the work I do with myself. This is the work I do with women. Is like we have to be aware of that, because just like a computer has an operating system based on the technology available when it was created, we have internal operating systems that are imprinted with the images, the beliefs, the models that we saw growing up. That we saw growing up through our family, through our education, through our friends, through our work, through your spiritual and educational upbringing. And these imprints, they drive your choices. They drive your behaviors. They drive your actions. And oftentimes they do it subconsciously. So the problem is that instead of having internal system that is programmed for personal sustainability, most of our personal internal operating systems are more like a blueprint for burnout. And it runs these programs inside of us that drive us to make choices that drain us versus sustain us. And it really makes it impossible for those changes that we know what to do. You know what to do. We all know what to do to get out of burnout. We all know what to do to take care of ourselves. It's not a lack of information that you lack, beloved. You lack permission and the internal to do what is the self-caring, not self-sacrificing act, to take the self-supportive act over the self-draining act. You lack permission and you lack the structures in your life, which we'll get more into next. There goes the surrender alarm again. We lack it. We lack it. So we have to surrender these internal operating systems and release them that aren't supporting us anymore. And think like some of the programming. So, I've been like looking at my own internal operating system for a long time. And I grew up with a mother who never sat down, ever, ever, ever. The woman had a full-time job, ran the Girl Scout troop, always had a second business, cooked for the food, ran the house. I mean, that's just what she did. And so I got this imprint that I cannot play until all my work is done. I cannot rest until all the work is done. Well, when is all the work ever done? All the work isn't ever done. That means I can never really rest, or never really rest without feeling guilty or like I should be doing more. That was a deep internal program, and it's still there for me. I mean, and I've been working that for probably a good 7 to 8 years when I found it. It's way less, but they get in there really deep. There's programs like I have to work hard to succeed. Only the strong survive. It's better to give than receive. If I don't do it, no one else will. And maybe at some time, maybe that kind of served you. But those programs right now are sabotaging you. And we haven't been able to break out and break free of burnout because we haven't been taught how to see our internal operating system. And you can't not change, underline this, you cannot change what you cannot see. And it's not like we can go to the hospital and like walk in for an x-ray and say, hey, can you take an x-ray of my burnout blueprint, please? Can you take an x-ray of my heart and talk to me about what's going on there at a root level of why I'm overgiving? Can you like look at my mind and see what imprints are in there that's driving me? But when you can get into your heart, and this is the difference, and we're going to talk more about this next week when we get into what is the path into liberation. You cannot get out of burnout without going into your heart. You cannot get out of self-sacrifice and overwhelm and overstretching yourself without going into your heart, because that is where the emotions are. And when you can see your emotions that drive you from a place of fear and self-sacrifice and blame and these imprints, and how those emotions lead to the thoughts that create your reality, that's when you gain the power to change. And over time, and we'll talk more about this next week too, as you make different choices, you start to trust that you can live and lead differently, and that internal operating system upgrades. And that's when you gain the power to elevate out of overwhelm. But you haven't been taught how to get into your heart. You haven't been taught how to illuminate these patterns. And it's not just a belief. There's a lot of work out there in the world that just says, change your beliefs, change your beliefs, change your beliefs. Well, yes, and it's so much more like an imprint. It's imprinted in you physiologically. It's imprinted in you socially, emotionally, spiritually. And you can't just change your mind. In fact, your heart is what rules your mind, not the other way around. And so it's not your fault that you have these imprints, but it is your responsibility, and from a place of self-empowerment, to illuminate them and then to do the work to give yourself the upgrade so that you can stop running these programs that do not serve you. And some you can see, and most you can't. And you cannot change what you cannot see. But then once you change it, and once you can see it, that's when we can change it. So what do you say? Are you willing to go beyond the 7 steps and 7 self-care tips? Are you willing to go beyond just thinking, oh, if I just change my mind? And would you be willing to go deeper into your heart to really look at what's going on there that drives the self-sacrifice and drives the burnout and the overwhelm? Because there's real stuff in there. And I know for myself, when I'm really willing to look in there at the fear, the lack, the shame, the blame, the whatever's going on in there, that's where my liberation comes from. And so just consider that. Maybe you're not ready. That's okay. Maybe you're really sick and tired of the overwhelm and the burnout and the patterns you've tried to get out of that you can't. And you're like, no, heck no, I'm ready to liberate. If I got to go into the heart, it's what you're saying to me, Christine, then I will. And if you're in the process of getting ready to get willing, that's okay too. We're all in our own process. But I invite you to consider and start to notice in your own life what imprints are running you and which ones are programmed to burnout and which are really programmed to harmony. Which leads us to the 4th truth, which is that your nervous system, so not only have you not been able to see your own internal operating system, you haven't been given the wisdom or the tools or the superpowers that you need to strengthen your nervous system. Now, we've talked about this some at Feminine Power Time. I'm all about talking about the nervous system. But, before I started Kundalini Yoga teacher training, I didn't know anything about the nervous system. Not really. And so the truth is that our nervous systems have not been conditioned or strengthened to handle the amount of information and stimulation coming at us, nor the increasing pace of the world. So the yogis predicted thousands of years ago that we would come to a time in humanity when the pace of our lives became unsustainable. And we're there. Someone just forgot to tell us women and give us the heads up memo. The sages warned that the amount of information and the effects of technology would create a living and working environments. And just think about this. Think about how different your life is now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and how much more information and technology is around you all the time. And what the sages said is that this would basically create living and working environments that our nervous systems and our glandular systems, our endocrine systems were not strong enough to handle, sending us into emotional, mental, and physical overwhelm. We're just not built for this. Maybe the kids that are coming up that are like just born, maybe they will because they're around it all the time. God, I hope not. But we are physiologically not set up to be able to withstand this. So the anxiety, the confusion, the lack of focus, the foggy brain, the depression, the addiction, the whacked out thyroids, the infertility, the ADHD, the ADD, love, these are all this increase that we're seeing in symptoms. It's not random. And we have to stop just trying to treat the symptoms as a way to survive in a world that's out of whack. So if you're in the mainstream fishbowl, what happens if any of these symptoms show up? They basically want to give you a pill to treat the symptom. In more evolved fishbowls, we're told to manage our stress, to do mindfulness techniques, to get to a weekly yoga class, and when we cross our fingers and we hope for the best. And yeah, in the short term, sure, what happens, right? We feel a respite, but eventually that overwhelm, it seeps right back in. Why? Because the system and the frenzy, they're way bigger than any one person. So when you try to make change without support, or without new systems and practices that operate at a higher consciousness, you just get pulled back into the fray. And so the yogic wisdom is clear on what to do. Change your pattern, change your life. This is why I always say, without a daily morning practice that sets your rhythm to harmony, that connects you to yourself, that creates an inner physical, mental, emotional, spiritual resilience, you cannot stay out of the swirl of the world. Yet when I go and I speak to a group of women like I just did last Friday, 50 women working in technology, surrounded by technology, I ask how many have a daily morning practice. They do consistently every day. And 1 out of 50 sheepishly raised her hand. This is not, if you are a person who doesn't have a daily practice, this is not a judgment against you. It's a call to you. That, at least in my experience, my MBA training, my on-the-job training, didn't prepare me for this, and it hasn't prepared any of the women that I work with, even if their companies are doing mindfulness things. Because it's not just about mindfulness to be more productive. There are solutions and strategies that we've been using, and this is the 5th and last one we're going to talk about today, to solve this problem of overwhelm and burnout, and they're just insufficient. They're outdated, and they don't have the power needed for these intense times. So we've been talking about work-life balance. We've been talking about stress management. We've been talking about self-care for decades. Yet the challenges are worse than ever because these solutions have hit their limit. Maintain work-life balance, it's the wrong equation, which we've talked about before. You can't split your life into 2 halves, 50-50. Balance is static. Your life is dynamic. Managing my stress. Why would you want to manage something that you don't want? It's an unwise strategy. Trying to manage stress is like trying to manage a room full of 2-year-olds. You can keep it under order for a while, but then it erupts in a meltdown. We erupt in a meltdown. And find and make more time. How many times have you said that? I need to find more time. I need to make more time. It's impossible. It's an impossible task. You can't find time. It's not lost. And you can't make more time. There is no time kitchen. And so we've talked about some of these in previous Feminine Power Times. I did the power time on the lie about time. Last year we did a series on the myth of balance. If you haven't listened to those, go back and do. There's some great content in there and some great thoughts. I've done several podcasts on the power of downshifting, the power of creating a morning flow. It's why I run Feminine Wisdom Way. And why we'll be opening up Feminine Wisdom Way again this summer for anyone that wants to join it for the half year. Why I do the flow power pause. Why I do all of these things is to bring this wisdom and these practices in a different way of living and succeeding, because the ones we've been given aren't sufficient. It was kind of like if we were Wonder Woman and someone gave us a lasso, but it had no superpower, and it said, now go in and you wrangle your life and you figure out how to make it work, but we have someone swapped out our lasso and we have some just piece of rope, versus the strategies and the structures and the practices and the tools that we need. Now, here's the great thing is that the sages left it for us. Some of it is connected to the yogic wisdom. Some of it's connected to feminine wisdom. Some of it's connected to indigenous wisdom. You look across those 3 traditions and you will find wisdom and practices. That's why I'm always talking about the practices. But part of it is also getting that, no, don't try to manage your stress. Release your stress. Forget work-life balance. It's about reconsolidating your life into a pattern of harmony and finding and making time. No, that's the wrong equation. We talk about creating space. Like there's so much. I mean, the whole feminine power time. And this is why I'm here in such a big way, because I know that you have so much to give in this world, that you have so much you desire to see in this world, that you have a tremendous amount of power and presence within you. And when I was given the instructions by the divine, by the universe, I always say I work for the universe, to go into the world and to write this next trilogy on women's empowerment and women's leadership. The third of which I already know the title of is called Fierce Grace. And that is truly, if you were to ask me what feminine power is, I would say the words, in a woman who embodies her true power, I would say what that looks like, and what I teach is fierce grace. And but I said, I don't know how to, I can't teach you that if I don't actually teach you how to get out of overwhelm? And so I sat and asked that question. How do I write a book that takes so much of what it actually takes to get out of overwhelm into something that actually is a path to getting out of the overwhelm? And it took me 1.5 years to write this book proposal. Because I realized that instead of 2 books, I had 3 books. The third book is called Flow, Find Your Flow. More on that later. I sat down with this book proposal just for Overwhelmed and Over It. And what was so clear was that what we needed was first to start by looking at these truths and illuminating it. And then a path for getting out of and liberating ourselves out of work-life balance, liberating ourselves out of giving all of our life force away, liberating ourselves out of all the overgiving that we do, liberating ourselves of starting our day already harried and hacked and feeling like we have to rush out of the day. And there actually is a path. Next week, I'm going to talk about the 5 points of this path of liberation. But for today and for this week, I want to just take a moment and underline what this podcast and this message is all about, is that it is not your fault that you have not been able to solve it thus far. And you are the only one who has the power to change it. And not by yourself. We're all faced with this. Even I'm faced with this. I live this. The reason I teach it, the reason why I'm writing the book about it, the reason why I'm opening up space for 11 to 13 women who want to go through this process with me of liberating themselves from the overwhelm, self-sacrifice, and burnout this summer and fall is because I'm living it. It's a practice. But we have to start with just getting, holy moly, look at these systems. They are built for burnout. Grow more, do more, make more, never enough, no matter how much you make or have. And look at it. Just open your eyes a little bit more this week and start to see the systemic burnout and the golden handcuffs or the whatever handcuffs, and just start to notice it. See it all around you. Open up. Say, I'm willing to see. And then 2, look at your own self-operating system and start to see your own feelings, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, imprints that are driving you straight into burnout, overwhelm, and self-sacrifice. And then lastly, consider what I'm inviting you into is that if we humans made the systems, that means that we humans, of which you are one, have the power to change these systems. You, me, I often say if every woman on the planet looked around, saw these systems, and we are built to create sustainability and life, the world would change tomorrow because we'd be like, heck no, we're not doing this anymore. And that's the place of your power. That's the place of your fierceness. And we'll talk more about that next week. But I invite you to consider chewing on that. Like if you did have the power to change, if it really was within you, how would that change how you design your life? Where you decide to focus at? And just notice. Just notice this week. The first step is always awareness. The second step is reflection, and then we start changing, and then we start upgrading our operating system. But I'll be back next week with the third in this series, and we'll talk more about the path to liberation and actual action. Your job, your role, your mission, should you decide to take it, is to become aware, open up your eyes, and see. And then if you are interested in knowing more and about being potentially one of the 11 to 13 women who I'm going to invite on this journey with me this summer and fall of overwhelmed, or overworked, overwhelmed, and over it, the path of liberation, go to overwhelmedandoverit.com. The invitation will be ready in the next several days, so you'll be one of the first ones to get it. And I would love and be honored to have you be part of this journey of creating what I feel like is going to be a missive and a beautiful book of wisdom for women and girls around the world and any brave, conscious men who choose to take the journey with us as well. And with that, I am going to send you off into the wild blue yonder to take a look and keep your eyes open. And for any of you that have friends who are experiencing the overwhelm, please share this podcast with them. Go down and scroll down if you're listening to this on your phone where it says share, press share, or you can go to iTunes and you can share from there or forward it to them. And as always, I appreciate your rating and review. Rate it, review it, share it, and let's get this wisdom out into the world, and let's invoke and liberate the hearts of women everywhere, and let's create a sustainable world. That's sustainable for the geese that are on my lawn, that are sustainable for the eagles, the whales, our children, the trees, everybody. So with that much love, and I'll see you next week. Talk to you soon.